Kum lena bak Gemarash, B'dvach Shuatov, Matzoi Shabbos Kedesh Parshat Vayikra, and we're up to Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. We'll begin from 3 lines on the top. We talked about this interesting case about someone who was a Nazir and doubtful if they're also a Tamei, and doubtful whether they went through their Mitzvah, and we went through the 4 different blocks of Nazirs that he has to go through, and all the different possibilities, and how to also manage the different karbanos, because each one requires a different set of karbanos, and how we manage the whole affair. So quickly, the Gemara wants to ask a general question. Shetaglachas hanega, and we also talk about the haircuts, 4 haircuts over the 4 after the 4 blocks. So one of the haircuts, or the third one, is in case the person was tamei. So the question, no, someone was a nazir, then they became tamei. They have to then wait 7 days, get sprinkled on twice, and then they go to mikveh, they take a haircut. And the question is, the purpose of that haircut. Is it just like a nazir haircut? So it's a mitzvah, this is the process, or is it simply to remove all the hair that grew while they were tamei, so they can start again? In other words, it's purely as an elimination, to remove the hair. What's the difference if it's a mitzvah just to remove the hair? The Gemara will explain. Ramach has an interesting question. Hani abba taglachis, these 4 taglachis, and our question is mainly about the third one, the one that possibly you're tamei. Is it a mitzvah? Or is it merely to remove the hair of tumah? During the hair that grew while you were tamei, you have to remove all that hair and then recalibrate your naziris. What's the difference? The mitzvah. What's the difference? What it is? Either one, you have to remove. You have to remove your hair. The difference is can you use a potion? Can you use some kind of a cream that completely removes the hair? So if it's a mitzvah, then like all the other mitzvahs, you use a razor. Here too, you have to use a razor. You can't use this potion. But if you can tell me if it's because just to remove the hair of tumah, the hair that grew while you were tamei, then I feel it is sachti and nami. You can also use a potion. So which one is it? Amar Rav says wrong. Hashma, in the Mishnah it says, Umegaleach arba taglachis. You give 4 haircuts. And so what? So there's 2 ways of understanding the Gemara. So according to some, the Gemara stops right here. Because the Mishnah says 4 haircuts, that means all 4 haircuts are identical. And just like 3 of them, you have to use a razor, the 4th one as well. But our version of the Gemara continues, and it says, Isal, and this is the proof, because Isal kedatach mishumi buris here tumah, if all you need to do is remove the hair of tamei. Then afila b'shalosh nami sagi. You took a haircut already before for tzaras, that even three should be good enough. Right? Because even 3 should be good enough, because you just took a haircut from Mitzvah. If all it is to eliminate the hair, the fact is the hair that grew while you were tamei, because if you were tamei, you were talking about in the beginning, and this is 60 days later, it's all gone. Why do you have to have a 3rd haircut? Obviously, it's a mitzvah. This is the process that even a nazir tamei has a mitzvah to take away the hair, and you cannot use a potion. You have to use a razor. Shmamana shemitzvah, shmamana, that proves conclusively that it is a mitzvah. Hadran aloch shnei nazirim, that completes the Perek of Shnei Nazirim. Mishnah. Hakusim, referring to Goyim over here. Ein lehem Naziris. Goyim don't have the concept of Naziris. Why do you have to tell me that? Because Goyim do have the concept of making a neder. Because it says, Ish, you will see in the Gemara, and they can bring karbanas. In fact, if they bring a carbon, we bring it into the Beis HaMikdash. That's the whole story of Tisha B'Av with Mei Mum. So their karbanas are consecrated. They do have the din of a carbon. And but Naziris, which is a form of neder, we say that by them it doesn't apply. Englam Naziris. That's number 1. Noshim, the avodim, yeshla Nazir. Women have Naziris, says in Torah clearly, ish or yisha. And avodim as well have Naziris, as we'll see later. How do we know? This Mishnah is going to tell you there's a stringency that women have that slaves don't have, and the following Mishnah will tell us there's a stringency that slaves have that women don't have, and that is as follows. What's the stringency of women over slaves? Which means that the slave still has Naziris, but the master has the right to say to the slave, I don't care. I want you to drink wine. I own you. I want you to be strong. I want you to be happy. and therefore the master can force the slave to not to adhere to his naziris. But he cannot force his wife if she's a nazir not to. He has a right within that short window b'yom shamay to go ahead and cancel that naziris. But he has no right if she became a nazir, he didn't cancel it. Then he has no right the next day, following day, to say, "Okay, I want you to drink wine." Can't do that. But that is a chumrah that women have and that women don't have, that a husband cannot in any way interfere in her naziris once it took effect. Okay, we're going to focus on this goyim. Tony, but in the Mishnah, Hakusim and naziris, goyim don't have the naziris. Maybe they do. It's a neder like any other neder. Why should they have naziris? So Rabban, we learned. It says in Basik, in the intro, in the preface to the whole thing of naziris, it says there. Daber el bnei Yisrael. It says in the pasuk, speak to the bnei Yisrael, and then it says, "V'amarta aleim." You should tell them that isha. I'm just quoting you the pasuk because we need to know the entire pasuk. Isha, a man or a woman, kiyafli. If he goes out and expresses linda neder, makes a neder, nozil lahazil Hashem. So because it's a daber bnei Yisrael, obviously Eden and Agoyim. Lebei Yisrael lo yivucham Agoyim. But then the pasuk says, "V'amarta aleim." Isn't that repetitive, redundant? What do you mean? Tell them. You just said daber bnei Yisrael. It comes to include someone. So who are we including? We're excluding goyim, and who are we including? The rabbis and avodim, to include servants, slaves. Says the Gemara, we know we're talking about an eved kanani here. An eved kanani, in order to become a slave, is forcibly converted, and they have the same status as women. Have all the mitzvahs that a woman has. No, and since naziris applies to women, then naturally it applies to avodim as well. What do I need a special pasuk to derive from there that avodim are included? Lamalikra. Why do I need a special pasuk to add v'amarta leim? Don't we have a rule called mitzvah she'isha chayevet, but any mitzvah that a woman is obligated to do, eved chayev, so to an eved. We learn exer shava from the word law. Amar Rava says, Rava, you're right. However, we would have thought that an eved is excluded here for another reason, from another pasuk which does not discuss nazir but discusses neder. And there in the pasuk of neder, there's an expression, a very interesting expression, where it says, Lesed isar al nafshay, to take upon yourself some kind of prohibition. Al nafshay. What kind of expression is al nafshay? It means someone that has control over their own destiny. But an eved has absolutely zero control of their destiny. Their master does, and therefore we would have thought that an eved is excluded from this neder. Rabba says, Rabba shiny hach is different. Damakra, it says by the Durham, it says lesed isar al nafshay. It says right, only somebody who actually has control over their destiny. But an eved does not have any control over themselves, and therefore, and since it does not have control, I would say I would say by nazir as well, because it says the word neder by nazir as well. Right? It says neder, lindoy neder nazir. So they're excluded. That's why we need the pasuk amarta aleim to include an eved. Now let's analyze this discussion. Speak to the Eden, not to a goyim. Let me ask you a question. Are you telling me when it says Bnei Yisrael goyim are excluded? We have a third place where it says neder, which is erchin. Erchin in the Parshas B'chukaisei is there's damim, there's demei alai, and there's erchin. Demei is value, the true value. So you go to the slave market and you work out how much this person is valued in the slave market.
So and if it can't take on a neder?
Sorry?
And if it can't take on a neder?
An eved cannot take on naziris. Oh, it could take on naziris, but we need a special pasuk.
Okay.
Now, I never going to never do it tomorrow. We'll see the Gemara. Well, you'll see the Gemara tomorrow. In tomorrow's Gemara, you'll see about an eved. What was I going to say? By erchin, if you use the expression erech, these are set values that the Torah put down in Parshas B'chukaisei, depending on the gender, depending on the age. So there it starts off as well. When it comes to erchin, it says there, we'll go daber b'nei Yisrael. That's how it starts off. The preface is all the dinim. Daber b'nei Yisrael, and tell them, ish ki yafli neder be'erkach Hashem. Use the word neder be'erkach, and it says daber b'nei Yisrael. So according to you, it means the guy is not involved. But let me ask a question. By erchin, the pasuk says daber b'nei Yisrael, excluding goyim, but then it says ish. Ish is sort of a generic term, which we say ish includes goy. In fact, how do we know that a goy can make a neder if they vow to bring a voluntary carbon to the base of Migdash, it becomes consecrated because it says ish, and ish includes goyim. So here on the one hand, it says Bnei Yisrael excluding goyim, and it says ish, which includes goyim. How does that work? Which means that there's a partial inclusion and a partial exclusion. So what are the goyim excluded from by Erchin, and what are they included in? Says the Gemara. But we learn B'nai, when it comes to be Myra, to be the donor, and to consecrate, the value of a person, B'nai Yisrael Marichin, only B'nai Yisrael can do that, and not Goyim. Yochel, I would have thought Lo Yid, they couldn't be on the receiving end as well. If a Yid says, I'm going to give the erech of that Goy to the base of Mikdash, we think it's a meaningless phrase. Tamalayim, it says Ish. Ish comes to expand the range and say that even a Goy is included. So we see each comes to expand. So our question is, if you look in the pasuk by Nazir, it says the same thing. It says Da b'nei Yisrael v'amart leim ish, and you're telling me each comes to include a goy. So on the one hand, a goy should be excluded, but on the other hand, a goy should be included. So there should be a partial inclusion. How do you know? And the Mishnah says that kusim ain't lem nazidus at all, totally. They have no association with nazidus. What happens with ish? By erichin, you use ish to include a goy partially. Why don't you use by nazidus also to include a goy partially? Says the Gemara Shanahach is different. The Amakra in the laws of Naziris, the Torah says there that you're not permitted to go ahead and contaminate yourself to anyone, nor can you and la'aviv l'ima in the way of la'aviv l'chaysa lo yitama. Shouldn't go ahead to the levaya of his parents. Now, this also becomes sort of the criteria, and that is only someone that has a father can have a din of Naziris. A guy doesn't have a father. What do you mean a guy doesn't have a father? In a legal sense? What do you mean has no father in a legal sense? Lamai. What are we referring to here? I mean, if the mother's a guy, then the child's a guy. So what are we referring to when we say there's no father legally? Well, generally, when we talk about a father, we think of inheritance. So are you trying to tell me that a guy does not have the laws of inheritance? Are you trying to tell me that this is regarding inheritance? That a guy has no din of a father and no association with a father. A guy not only inherits his father, he inherits mahatoidush. And then it says, there's actually an argument in the Gemara there if a guy has Yerusha, and then this pasuk of Esav, the Gemara says, Esav might be different than Gemara Kedushin because Dilma Yisrael Mumurhu. That maybe he was considered like an apostate. He was a Yid. Esav Halachli was a Yid, he was just an apostate. Yisrael Mumur. We also say that a ger, even though he technically is no longer related to his family, but Midrabanan, he should have a Yerusha so that he shouldn't go back and revert to his old way, saying, look at the cost that it came, that it came out to become a Yid. But bottom line is, a guy also has the laws of Yerusha. So what do you mean he has no father? So I'll tell you, you're right. In a different respect, in a legal respect, he has no father. And which is that? And what is that? The Mishim Muzala Kibbutz. The whole idea of going to a funeral is Kibbutz. A guy from the 7 mitzvahs ben Noach, none of them are the mitzvah of Kibbutz. Gemara says, where does it say anywhere in the laws of Naziris that you can only be a Nazir if you have a mitzvah of Kibbutz? Where does it say that? All it says is that you don't go ahead to their funeral. Where does anything about honoring, respecting the parents? Ella says the Gemara. I have to warn you that you as a Nazir don't go ahead and contaminate yourself to your parents. In other words, there's a concept of tumah, and sometimes we allow you to go to your parents, but not in this instance. But because a goy, the entire concept of tumah does not apply to a goy. If a goy touches a mace, a corpse, does not become tamei, doesn't pass on the tumah to anyone else. So because the entire concept of tumah doesn't apply to a goy, so this pasuk la'avi v'lim tama obviously is not talking to a goy, which proves that a goy has nothing to do with naziris. The mishi yesh like tumah, only someone that has the laws of tumah. Yatzav yechad m'shein tumah. A goy doesn't have any law of tumah. Says the Gemara, how do you know that? Who told you a guy doesn't have? How do you know if a guy touches a corpse, he doesn't become tummy? Not that the guy cares, but if the guy then goes ahead and touches a person or touches food or utensils, how do you know they don't become tummy? So I'll tell you how I know. Because Amakra, it says in Pasuk, the ish asher yitma, if a person becomes tummy, the loy is chata and doesn't cleanse themselves, doesn't purify themselves, and then enters the Beis Hamikdash, the nichrasa hanefesh ahi, that person will be cut off. Mitoicha kol, from the congregation. Now the congregation is only a Jewish concept. Only those that fit into our congregation has this prohibition of entering the base of Mikdash. This person is not part of the congregation, which means that the entire concept of Tumah doesn't apply to a goy. And that's how we know that it doesn't apply to a Nazir. That a goy can't be a Nazir. It doesn't mean anything. Says, well, who told you to read the pasuk that way? How do you know that's what the pasuk means? Dilma, perhaps, when we say that you have to become tamei, we're talking about as far as entering the Beis Hamikdash, whether you get kares, whether you get killed. But maybe tumah applies to a goy. Dilma kares lemechai. Maybe all the pasuk is trying to tell us is that a goy does not have the laws of kares if while they're tamei they enter the Beis Hamikdash. But perhaps tamei he will become. How do you know? You established that a goy doesn't become tamei. How do we know that? So we want to read another pasuk. Omakra, says the pasuk. The hiza hatoil al tamei. When it comes to the paraduma, the sprinkle of ashes, we want a tomadika person, a toidika person, to sprinkle it on a tomadika person. So we compare, we equate. The word Torah seems to be superfluous. Obviously, a toidika person sprinkle his tummy, he's going to ruin the whole thing. So why does it Torah? To tell you, only those people that have the laws of purification also have the laws of tumah. Those who don't have the laws of purification don't have the laws of tumah. And we know when it comes to purification, does not apply to a goy, because there's a pasuk where it says, this should be for the Jewish community. They should guard this, mechatasi, and this they should guard the paraduma. So we know that the goyim don't have the law of purity, and whoever does not have the laws of purity doesn't have the laws of tumah. Says the Gemara, that's how we know a goy doesn't have it. Says the Gemara again, how do you know? Maybe a guy can't become purified. Or but he can become tamei. Maybe he becomes tamei if he touches the corpse and he passes the tumah. How do you know we don't? Omakra. It says in pasuk. Back to the pasuk by the way, in English. The ish asher yitma, if a person who comes tamei v'loy yizchata, and it didn't purify himself. So we say, who can become tamei? Only someone that has the option to purify themselves. And because a goy cannot purify themselves, therefore, a goy cannot become tamei as well. So, what do we do with the pasuk v'hiza hator? We just said before that it's extra. What do we need that pasuk for? So we say either we use it to learn what learning Mariyuma, that if you intended to sprinkle the ashes on a behema instead of a person, then land on a person, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. It has to be someone that has the laws of tumah. Or here is talking about a Torah, somebody who was Torah from the beginning. We're trying to learn somebody who is tamei and becomes Torah. Nothing to do with that pasuk. Anyway, so what are we answering right now?
So why do we say the goy can't be metahir?
Because it says in the pasuk, if you look in Taisus, the second Taisus on the top of the page, he brings a pasuk there.
Okay.
It says v'hoisel adas b'nei Yisrael l'mishmeres l'mei nida chatasi. So we see that when it comes to paraduma, it says l'bnei Yisrael.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Adas Yisrael, it says. Okay. Now, so bottom line, what do we learn from there? Why a guy has no shaykhs at all to Naziris, even though it says ish, because it says la'avi v'la'imai, only someone that has a concept of tumah, and a goy does not have the concept of tumah. That's answer number one. Answer number two, that Achaba Yaakov wants to say, let's go back to the original answer. We said that only somebody who inherits his father, goyim don't inherit, but we proved that a goyim do. But there's one aspect of inheritance that does not apply to a goy. That if a goy cannot bequeath to his children any slave that he owns. Why is that? Because slaves are people. We can pass on slaves because the Torah gave us the right to actually own the slave itself. When it comes to a goy, what he doesn't own the goof of the slave. He only owns the value of the slave. So therefore, it's not a commodity that you can just pass on to your children. So there's one aspect of Yerusha, of bequeathment, that does not apply to a goy. And therefore, it's not really a full ovid. By Yid, a full ovid could pass everything on to the children, and a goy can't. That's what Abba Yaakov says. Shine Hoch is different. Yerusha is to pass on the bequeath, the slaves that you own. If you can bequeath everything, including your slaves, then the laws of Tumah apply. Because then we say that that you have a father, you have a proper father. But anybody who does not have a nachla cannot pass it on, does not have a tumah, which means that the guy doesn't have a nazir. So that's right away. So how can I ever be a nazir? An eved, even if an eved owned a slave, how is that possible? Because everything that belongs to an eved belongs to the master. If somebody gave the eved, gifted the eved a slave and said, on the condition that your master doesn't have any share in this whatsoever, then the slave owns it outright. But still, the slave cannot pass it on to their children, because the slave does not own another slave, the slave itself.
Nachla normally refers to Yerusha of land. in Eretz Yisrael.
Not in the pasuk. It's Nachal Mois and Parsha Bahar. There we know clearly from the context
Talking
of the
about
Parsha,
Avodim.
talking about avodim.
Okay.
Yeah, says the Gemara. It says in the pasuk, in that very same pasuk, it's talking about slaves. They will work for you forever. Avodim shouldn't be able to be Nazir as well because they don't have the right to inherit. So we reject out of hand of Acha's answer. Comes along Rav and says, I'm not even going to answer you. I'm going to prove to you your question is not a question. Sometimes you have a question and I give you an answer. I'm going to prove to you your question is a meaningless question. What is your question? Your question is, it says on the one hand, Bnei Yisrael by Nazir, and it says also Ish. So you want to be partially excluded and partially included. So let's break down the Nazir and let's see what part do you want the goy to be included and what part do you want to be excluded. So the first attempt the Gemara says is simple. The laws of Nazir apply to a goy, but the laws of carbon don't apply to a goy. Remember, there's a chattas included. A goy cannot bring a chattas, so the laws of carbon don't apply. Why don't we do that? They can be a nazir. That's a partial inclusion, and the partial exclusion is they cannot bring kabbalas. We're going to work our way through and see if that makes sense. Says the Gemara, it's possible to do part and part. It says Bnei Yisrael on the one hand. So Bnei Yisrael marichin, that only Eden can donate, not the goyim. On the receiving end, that shouldn't be there as well. Each comes to include goyim. Bnei Yisrael noizin umevin carbon over here. Bnei Yisrael are nazir, and they bring a carbon. There's two things, two parts of the right? There's the naziris and then the kabbalas. The ein ha'oiv the kachavim noizin umevin carbon, and when we say now Mishnah goy is not involved, it means he has nothing. Yochol aflo yedin klal. So So goy maybe the part is that they do become a nazir, they just don't bring the carbon. Maybe they can't be a nazir role. You want to argue that Ish says let's include a goy. So you want to say we'll include the goy in the ziris, exclude the goy from kabbanas. Got a problem with that? Why is that? Because Amri, I'll tell you, imishum carbon. If you want to exclude a goy from the kabbanas of a nazir, lav mahacham nafkule. We already have another pasuk that tells us that a goy is excluded from the kabbanas of a nazir. So if the pasuk says Bnei Yisrael, we want to exclude a goy, it has to be something over and above the kabbanas. Which pasuk do we have? Elamahasam, we have it from the pasuk there where it says Ish Beis Yisrael that could bring a carbon, the chol nidreisem, chol nidvaisem. That's how we learn a goy can bring a carbon, a neder or an adava, can offer a voluntary carbon. But then it says Asher yakrivu Hashem le'oila. They could bring it to the Eibishter as an oila. What do we bring to the Eibishter as an oila? What's it? A word oila is extra to tell you that he cannot bring it for a nazir. That a goy cannot bring a carbon aziris. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglui, Prat aziris. So we don't need the pasuk here, Bnei Yisrael, to exclude a goy from a carbon. Obviously, excluding something over and above that. The whole idea of naziris. So you want to know? Let's break it up a little bit differently. Bnei Yisrael nazir olam. A yid can be a nazir forevermore, and the ein avicham nazir olam. A goy can become a nazir, the short-term naziris, but not the one that's forever. The one that we said they take a haircut every so often. That one's very, very long. So I would have thought the goy shouldn't be nazir at all. Talmud Leimer Ish tells you a goy is a nazir, but what do we remove from the goy? Nazir olam. Maybe that's what the pshat in the pasuk is. So it can be. Where in the Torah do we know the concept of nazir olam? Nowhere. It's nowhere written in the Torah at all. In fact, where do we learn Nazir olam from? From Avshalom, from his behavior. Then his hair got tangled in the tree. So how can the Torah come to exclude a goy from a din that's not found in the Torah? So it says, does make sense. Okay, Moshe, I'll give you another one. Bnei Yisrael, Madirin Bnei, that Yidden can have the right to make their children a Nazir. The but a goy does not have the right to make his child a Nazir. And that's what we take away from the goy. That's what Bnei Yisrael has come to exclude. You would think that should be Nazir. They are Nazir. So again, it doesn't make sense. Because if you remember the Gemara knows that of Chavtes, we had the argument of Yechon Shlakish, the halacha of Yechon, and he says, how do you know that a parent has the right to pass on the zeros to the children? Halacha l'Moshe Messinai. The entire idea of Halacha Messinai is that was given to us orally. So the Torah is coming to exclude a goy from a din that was given to us. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai doesn't make sense. Why would the Torah exclude Halacha l'Moshe Messinai? You must say, okay, another din. If somebody, let's say, was a nazir and he passes away before he had a chance to bring he set aside the kabbanis already, this person's son or daughter has the right to use that, the son has the right to use the kabbanis. The guy can't do that. That's what we do. The guy can become a nazir, but we take away from the guy the right to use his father's kabbanis. Maybe that's what it is. Yochel, I would have thought lo yei nazir should be nazir at all time. It can't be, because again, where do we know this din that you could use your father's kabbanis? That in itself is halacha Moshe Messina. You think the Torah would come along and exclude a guy from a din which is not recorded in the Torah, but rather halacha Moshe Messina? Can't be. And therefore, the Rava says, you have a question that each comes to include. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Can't be. There's nothing that you can exclude from exclude and then include. There's no part. There's no parts. So if we exclude a guy, he's excluded entirely from the whole concept of Naziris. Says the Gemara, okay, so that's a question. But the fact is it says Ish. And the fact is by Erchim we use Ish to include a guy to be Nerech. Says the Gemara, if so, it says in the Pasuk, Ish ki yafli neder. It says Ish ki yafli neder be'erchin. So let me ask you a question. Why does it say ish ba'erchin? You told me it says ish to include a guy. But mechdi, ha'iskish erchin nadarim. In the pasuk of erchin, it uses the expression nadar be'erkecha. So it talks about nadarim. And by the amakra, and by neder, it says already by neder, ish ki yafli neder. Sorry, because it says the pasuk ish ki yafli neder be'erkecha, right? So it says already neder. And what do we know about the Dorim? What Tanya we learn by the Dorim? Ish matam belem. By the Dorim it says ish. It says about the Dorim that they can bring kabbanas. Ish l'rabbadim chavim to include a guy. So by the Dorim we include a guy that can bring kabbanas. By Erchin it uses the word neder, so we know that a guy is included. Why does it have to spell out ish by Erchin? What does it come to add? Why does it say, since you're telling me right now, okay, by Nazir it says ish, we have no choice. Because we want to tell you that a woman also can be a Nazir. So it says isha. So every time it says isha, it always says ish as well. So it says isha, we have no choice. But now you also have ish by neder, that you can bring karbanis nedarim, voluntary karbanis, and you also have ish by erkin. Since the word by erkin is also neder ergecha, why do I need ish by erkin? I already know from nedarim that a goy can make nedarim, so a goy can make erkin as well. What do I need ish for? And we said before, it comes to include ne'erachim. And lahai ish boile, you know what you need it for? So you teach you the following din. Mufle samuch leish. We learned that by nedarim, even a minor, a year under bar mitzvah, a year under bas mitzvah, they understand, if they're mature, then nedarim have the full weight of a neder. And according to one opinion, it's mehatorah. And that's what the ish is coming to teach you, the extra ish, to tell you that even a minor can also make these nedarim that have the full weight of a neder. Nothing to do with the guy. Says the Gemara, this makes sense. This will only make sense. If you hold it's my Torah, so the pasuk ish is from the Torah telling you that a minor is also included. But the one that says it's midrabanan, so obviously a minor have to abide by nedarim is only midrabanan. So the question goes back: what's the ish for? Ish ki yafli lumbali. Why do you need by erkin ish ki yafli neder ekchat? Not to tell you a goy, we know that for neder. Not to tell you a minor, because we know it's not true. A minor can't make a neder. What's it coming? So Gemara says a most astonishing thing. La suye, to teach you that mufla samach leish the oivekachat. You're right. By a yid, if this kid is a minor, a 12-year-old boy or 11-year-old girl, then the darim are meaningless. But by a goy, whose nedarim are meaningful, if this kid is a minor but mature, their nedarim are meaningful, which is hafula pella, that a goy should be stricter than a yid. By a yid, a minor is not mahatorah, their nedarim, but by a goy, the minor is. Everybody asks the question. So Rashi gives an answer which is very difficult to understand, at least to me. Rashi says, because we find there's certain stringency by a goy over a yid. A goy, if he kills, if his cow gores the cow of a yid, then he has to pay full nezik, the full damage the very first time. If a yid animal damages a guy, you're exempt. So what? What does that have to do with that? By the same mitzvah, a minor, a yid is nedarim don't count, but by a guy it does count.
That's a
very difficult to understand.
Sorry, it's a punishment more.
Why punishment?
Well, he's punished more that he has to pay. He doesn't.
Yeah. So what's that to do with the how do you use that to explain nedarim?
No,
are you trying to use that?
Sense.
Sorry?
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's very difficult to understand. What does it mean? Anyway, difficult sense. So maybe the pshat as follows. Maybe pshat as follows, and that is, there's a big argument. How do you know a boy bar mitzvah is 13 and a girl then a year younger? So we had a Rashi and Nazir. Rashi brings from Shimon and Levi. When they went to attack Shechem, the Torah calls them Ish, or Nashim, and Levi at that time, we know, was exactly 13 years old. So the earliest recorded, I guess, in history that the Torah uses the noun Ish is regarding a 13-year-old, and a girl is a year younger. That's Rashi. And the idea is because that's when they mature. However, the Rosh in the Shal Chuvas, he says that no, that a bar mitzvah is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This idea, a girl 12, a boy 13, no reference in the Torah, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So what is the difference between the Rosh and Rashi? The big difference is by a goy. Tosfos and Chulin tells us that halacha l'Moshe Sinai does not apply to goyim. Does not apply to a goy at all. Like we learned over here a little bit. Now, if the basis for 13 or 12 years old is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, then a goy, what age do they become responsible? When they mature. When they mature. And every goy is whatever age they're at. If you learn like Rashi, because they're called an ish, because that's when they mature, then a goy is the same thing. A goy will be 13 years old for a boy and 11, 12 for a girl. No difference when they eat, because that's the sign of maturity. But according to the Rosh, you'll learn by us, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and a goy's maturity, so we have very different rules. And that's what the Gemara is saying here is. That's what the Gemara, according to this opinion, is saying here. That by a yid, that the idea of 13 years old is, that's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. If it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, then 12 years old is not an adult, and 11-year-old girl is not an adult, and the potter. But by a goy, it's not based on halacha l'Moshe Sinai. By a goy, it's based on maturity. So if this kid is 12 or the girl is 11, and they're mature enough, they understand what the Nedarim are about, then they are included. And the Torah says that they are included as well, because as long as they're mature. And it's not a problem that by Yid is different, because we work on a different set of rules. By us, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, our age, and therefore under that, you're potter. It's not a neder. By goyim, it works on maturity. So if this kid is mature enough, comes to the Nedarim, the Torah tells us that the erichin are valid. Maybe that's how you can explain the Gemara. And let's continue the Gemara.
Steinsaltz brings down from Keren Oira. I think it's the he brings down. They said there's no chiluk between, by Jews there's a chiluk between Kotan and Godel. By Goyim there's no such thing, no concept at all.
That's a Chassam Sofer, famous Chassam Sofer.
Is it? Oh, okay. He brings a Keren Oira, who's Keren Oira?
Who actually he lived before the Chassam Sofer.
Okay.
But it's a famous Chassam Sofer. He wants to say about Goyim, it starts from the first day. But others say what I just told you right now.
Yeah.
And which makes sense in our Gemara, because if you learn that way that there's no age, then what do you mean teaching that a goy samach muful ish, a goy as soon as they're liable for everything?
Yeah,
they're 4 years old, 5 years old. Anyway, let's continue Gemara. Okay, so you want to teach a 12-year-old guy is already the Nedarim are valid. Now, we learned before that a goy cannot be a donor, but they can be on a receiving end. There's actually another opinion exactly the opposite. This makes sense according to the other opinion that says that goyim cannot be on the receiving end. I would have thought they shouldn't be also on the donor side. But ish. This opinion holds exactly the opposite of what we said before, that goyim can donate and consecrate that money to the Beis HaMikdash, but they cannot be on the receiving end. Okay, so now you're telling me that a goy who makes a neder, even if it's a minor, the Nedarim are valid. Fine. Shop, it makes sense. But according to what it says, that Bnei Yisrael, a Mayrich, and goy, the way we learn, that goyim cannot be the donors, so that when you come, so what's the Muflas HaMelech coming to teach you? On the receiving end, you could be a month old, as we'll see in a minute. Even be a month old, and everyone, the Torah gives a value to everything. So what's it coming to teach you? What's it coming to ish coming to teach you that a samech hamufal ish, but a donor you cannot be. You can only be on the receiving end. And the receiving end makes no difference how old you are. And you shouldn't, this Bryce Holo we said before that you shouldn't be on the receiving end as well. Ish. I feel even a month old. So what kiyafli lumli? What do they do with this kiyafli ish? Amar Rab Adabar answers, La Suya to tell you a chiddush, the other way around, the flip side. By a yid, once you're 13, as long as you're not a shaita, you're chayiv in all the mitzvahs. A girl, once they're 12 years old, they're chayiv in all the mitzvahs. By a goy, even if you're 13, even if you're 12, only if you're mature. The afagav the gadol, even though he's an adult, if he does not, at least when it comes to erchin, if he does not understand, he's not clear or doesn't fully understand what he's doing, therefore he is potter. He doesn't, and in other words, make lenient on goyim, not that it's stricter, they're more lenient. Ki yafli means that this goy, we're talking about a goy now, yafli has to understand, has to be clear and know what he's doing. And if he's 25 years old, doesn't fully understand what he's doing, what it means to consecrate something, there's no nothing here. Now, very difficult to understand the Gemara. You just said that we're going according to the opinion that a guy cannot donate anything. So you're only on receiving end. Now you tell me that a guy could donate. It's only if he's not mature. So Rashi therefore learns now, he changes the whole Gemara around. He said everybody agrees that a guy could donate. And the only difference is they're only arguing about if you could be on the receiving end. That one brisa holds that a guy cannot be on the receiving end at all. And the first brisa we learned a guy could. Tracy learns nothing changed, but we don't, even though we're talking about erchin, since it cannot be talking about erchin because a guy cannot be a donor, we're talking about all the darim. A guy, when it comes to all the darim, he has to fully understand what they're saying when they could commit themselves to a neder. Says the Gemara, Ella kiyafli the kosav rachmana gabe nazir. By nazir it says the word kiyafli. You're telling me that what? That it says ish kiyafli has to be clear. What do you mean by clear? By nazir, it's an extra word yafli. What do you mean clear? Lomali mechdi, and not only that, you find the same word yafli. Ishkid nazir is nadarim. We find nazir says the word neder. By neder says the word neder, and by erkin says the word neder. And since we already have the word yafli by erkin, why do you have to repeat the word yafli again when it comes to nazir? We already know. When it comes to neder, you have to be clear. You have to understand what you're saying. Ki yafli lomali we need twice. So the Gemara says, now there's a lot of different versions of the Gemara here. I'll just give you the one that takes in the rush. La'asuye, normally la'asuye means to include. Here la'asuye means to exclude. Yadayim she'em echichus. Yadayim echichus, remember, yadayim is the handle. You have the pot and you have the handle. And there's two kinds of handles. There's the handle which is very clear what you're trying to say. If you're saying hare atmuras, you say, girl, you're engaged and you're giving a ring, even though you didn't say the word li, according to Moshe Shonim, that's called yadayim echichus. Obviously what you're trying to say. But Yadayim she'em echichus is there were two women, you gave one woman, gave it 2 coins, 2 prutas, and you said, you're engaged to me, and then you turned to the other girl next to her and you said, and you. Now it's not clear what do you mean by and you. And you also are engaged to me with that pruta, or are you saying and you are witnessing this? What does it mean and you? That's called Yadayim she'em echichus. We had an argument whether that's conclusive or not. So these will be learned. It's coming. Yafli means it has to be moichiach. If it's not clear, it's not a valid neder. The even we learned Yadayim and saying by another Yadayim she'ein meichiches. Abaye says loy havin Yadayim, sorry, Abaye says have Yadayim. Rava says loy havin Yadayim. So Rava says it's not Yadayim, and where does he learn it from? Because it says kiyafli. It says kiyafli. L'Abaye, I'm giving you Taisa's version of the Gemara. The Rav, it makes sense. I need the word Yafli. Tell me it has to be clear and conclusive. You have to be Daim Mechich. L'Abaye Ma'iklamim. Abaye hold that your Daim Mechich is good enough. What does he do with the word Yafli? Elaki Yafli. You know what you do with the word Yafli? The boy like Rav Tarfon. Like Rav Tarfon said, which we had on a number of occasions. The Tanya we learned, Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav Tarfon. Ain't echad men nazir. There's a person walking by. One guy says, if that person is a nazir, I'll be a nazir. The other one says, if that person is not a nazir, I'll be a nazir. And the din is, Rav says neither of them is nazir, because at the time when you said those words, you had no clarity as to what the situation will be. If you're need the nazirus in order to become a nazir, it has to be la'aflo. You have to be 100% clear at the time you took it upon yourself. Says okay, honey Rav Tarfon. Okay, according to Tarfon, I understand why you need the extra word yafli when it comes to, let's say, nazir. But Rabbanan who don't agree with Tarfon, they say that the one person is a nazir. What are they going to say? Why do you need ki yafli? Once you have ki yafli by erchin, why do you need it by nazir? You don't need it for the Gilatani. We're learning Gemara Chagiga. The Mishnah says there, head to the door and parchim ba'avir. The idea that you go to 3 people and cancel your neder is a parchim ba'avir. There's no basis for it in the Torah. In fact, the Gemara there concludes it says you should not breach your own words. So we darshan, you shouldn't breach your own words. But others can cancel your neder. It's not clear in the Torah. There's very little for them to rely on. Rabbi Lezer says no. You know how you know you can cancel a neder? From the fact it says twice ki yafli, which means to be clear. Yes, from our because you have to rely on. Shneimar, in one passage it says by erech it says ish ki yafli, and then it says again ki yafli when it comes to nazir. Shtei pamim twice. Achas, one of them is haflol is that means that if you have a clear neder, it's also to breach your neder if you don't regret it. But the other one is haflol heter, that you can clearly cancel your neder if you regret ever making the neder in the first place. You have charat. Okay, we'll stop here.